This year's Conservative Party conference, the Tories were aggressively defending their fracking policy. During a side event on the fringe of the conference, Energy Minister Claire Perry defended the fact that fracking has just started in the UK. Claire Perry was actually quite dismissive of the anti-fracking movement, and she was making the point that shale gas was an asset to the UK, which will create jobs for Lancashire, which has long been left behind in terms of economic development. And the government is pushing ahead despite very, very strong voices and concerns over the birth of this new fossil fuel industry. What was interesting is that organisations like the Institute of Economic Affairs and the Taxpayers Alliance were given a prominent spot at the Conservative Party conference this year, right by the entrance. So that meant that every delegate, every minister, every official had to walk past their events. Both those organisations work out and are part of this network, which is based at 55 Tofton Street near Westminster, and they're part of a transatlantic group of libertarian organisations which are pushing for deregulation, and their ideology is to lower food and environmental standards, and they consider regulation as costly to business and a barrier to trade. This also shows that actually that kind of ideology is becoming somehow mainstream in conservative ideology. If people want to find out more about organisations like the IEA and the Taxpayers Alliance and where they fit into this wider political agenda, there are plenty of independent media outlets which are covering this, and this includes places like Open Democracy, but you can also have a look at DeSmogUK's own website, where we have been mapping these networks and the overlap between the climate science denial network in the UK and these free market libertarian organisations.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a ginormous group of scientists. They're all professors in universities. They actually do the IPCC reports for free. So these aren't people employed by politicians, these aren't people affiliated to governments. That's why it does have the authority that politicians and the rest of the media and the rest of the world give it. One of the major things that this report did was outline exactly what benefits you get from holding warming to 1.5 degrees rather than 2 degrees. And what we really found is the scientists are saying it's really worth doing. So, for example, you'll save some coral reefs that will be lost if we go to 2 degrees, if we manage to hold warming to 1.5 degrees. Biodiversity, a lot of that will be saved. Now, you've got to bear in mind that we've already experienced 1 degree of warming just from the emissions that we've already put into the atmosphere. And under current trends, we're heading for somewhere between 3 and 4 degrees of warming. We have to implement all the things we know that cut emissions, like phasing out fossil fuels and ramping up renewables, cleaning up our transport systems, cleaning up our agriculture. We need to do all this stuff within the next 12 years or so. So that involves an absolutely rapid transformation of our society, of our economies, of the way we live. The media coverage of the IPCC report in the UK was actually really interesting to look at. It was on the whole really decent. Having said that, there were some exceptions. So the BBC coverage, while on the whole, particularly on the website, they dedicated a lot of time and space to it and did some really great coverage. They invited a climate science denier called Myron Ebell onto Newsnight. Myron Ebell was in charge of Donald Trump's transition team for the Environmental Protection Agency, working out who was going to do what job on the environmental front. Now, obviously, what's turned out is that they've ended up with a load of climate science deniers and fossil fuel lobbyists in key positions within that Environmental Protection Agency. DeSmogUK pointed out that, well, actually, the IPCC confirmed what the fossil fuel companies knew 30 years ago. There's graphs and charts on internal oil industry reports that show that they know if we keep emitting as we're emitting, if we keep burning their products and releasing all this carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, we're going to hit 1.5 degrees and pass 1.5 degrees pretty soon. Now, that's exactly what the IPCC just told us in this matter report. And if that's the case, why haven't these fossil fuel companies done something about it? Why weren't they honest with shareholders? Why weren't they honest with the public that this is what their products did? And the simple answer is because big oil is not in the interest of trying to have a climate-friendly world.
The Oil and Money Conference is a mainstay of the oil and gas industry. It happens in London every year. It takes place at the International Park Lane Hotel, and it's basically 500 plus oil and gas executives, which include the CEOs of companies like BP, Shell, Chevron, Total, etc. They have a gala dinner next door from the International Park Lane Hotel at the Dorchester Hotel. So there was a range of campaign groups present in front of the hotel. That included anti-fracking protesters. There were also fossil-free London, I think fossil-free Hackney, fossil-free Camden and fossil-free Islington were there, and groups like Extinction Rebellion were also present, calling on the whole conference to shift its focus away from oil and money to actually a wider debate about energy transition and how we're going to power our homes and countries and the world without using their products. BP CEO Bob Dudley said divestment from fossil fuel was not a solution, that oil and gas had to be part of the transition to a low carbon world, and this was a matter of decades and not years. On the same day, leading scientists from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned that the world had 12 years to take rapid and unprecedented action. On the agenda of the conference itself, there was actually discussions on how oil and gas could use PR to combat, and quote, to combat the growing divestment movement. It's definitely a sign that it's won some grounds over the last few years, and the oil and gas industry has started taking them a bit more seriously. There's plenty of ways to find out more about this or to get involved. I think the Fossil Free group is probably the best way to start. They're all across the country, and there would be a way to get involved if people wanted to join those kinds of campaigns.
It's been a really major couple of weeks for fracking activism and news around fracking in the UK. What we've seen is this massive escalation of this kind of criminalisation of environmental activism that tries to campaign against fracking in this country. So we've already got these draconian injunctions in place. We've already seen the conflicts between the national government and in particular the Tory party who support fracking and local communities and local governments that have said no and haven't given their consent for that to happen in their area. And now what we've seen in the last couple of weeks is 3 people get convicted and given between 15 and 16-month jail sentences for protesting against fracking at Preston New Road in Lancashire. The reason that these people got convicted and sent to jail was because they boarded some lorries near the Preston New Road fracking site. So 4 people climbed on top of lorries and stayed there for a few days. It was a really amazing sight. DeSmogUK was there at the time when they boarded those lorries and saw the entire convoy that was going to supply Quadrilla's fracking site stopped. Now they stayed up there for a few days. They got down, they were arrested, and they were convicted of a public nuisance offence for that. 3 of the protesters were sent to jail, a 4th pled guilty. A couple of weeks after they were given these sentences, the case went to appeal, and the appeal court found that actually those sentences were manifestly excessive and released them. They said that actually a much more appropriate sentence would have been community service. You know, it was not jail time. But there's another twist to this tale. The judge who gave those manifestly excessive sentences is now under investigation by the Judicial Conduct Investigations Office. The Daily Mirror did a splash about a week ago which showed that the judge's family has ties to the oil and gas industry. So the parents' company, Altham & Sons, is part of Centrica's supply chain. Now Centrica have a stake in Quadrilla's Lancashire fracking site. On top of that, the sister, who was one of the directors of this company, signed an open letter supporting that particular fracking activity. The Lord Chancellor and the Lord Chief Justice are on this panel investigating this complaint, and the Lord Chief Justice was one of the judges on the appeal court who overturned the Frack 3's sentences for being manifestly excessive. Quadrilla started fracking at their site a couple of weeks ago, and we've just heard that they've actually had to pause that fracking operation because of tremors. What we're seeing is this continuation of this stop-start process that the fledgling fracking industry in the UK is experiencing and has been experiencing in the last few years. That's largely down to huge public opposition. So firstly, the public said no, and then the local governments took that on board and said no, and then the national government pushed it through. But throughout this all, the public haven't got disheartened. They've continued to oppose these plans. You know, these people in Lancashire do not want fracking happening in their area, and they've made their presence felt. The IPCC report has come out and said, well, we need to start phasing out fossil fuels now, and that certainly doesn't mean starting new fossil fuel industries like the fracking industry in the UK. Likewise, the Conservative Party are the only party that continue to support fracking. The Labour Party came out at their conference and said that they weren't going to support it and they'd ban it if they got into power. And in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon is currently exploring ways to actually outright ban fracking up north of the border as well. So the future of this industry is far from secure.